The APIs are what allow all those integrations, and we can start to then configure what we want people to do with what should happen when something else happens. The best API design in the world is worthless without good docs and good tutorials. And for me, that's what drives my open source history into today's developer advocacy and digital advocacy, because actually our communities are everywhere and they now can be everywhere more so than ever.
Welcome to this episode of API Resilience. We're talking about APIs and the ways that you can strengthen your business in this time that people are trying to figure out what to do as a result of the corona crisis. Today, we're really excited to have Lorna Mitchell on. She is a prolific writer, speaker, and an instructor. You can check her out at lornajane.net and on Twitter at Lorna Jane, LornaJane. She's currently at Vonage as a developer advocate. And in our pre-conversation, I can already tell you that this is going to be a great episode, and she's got a bunch of interesting things to talk to us about.
Hi, Lorna. It's really good to have you.
No pressure. Hi, Mike.
So it's like we were brainstorming, like, who should we have on the podcast? And then your name came up, and it's like, yeah, let's do that. Because I don't know exactly how long we know each other, because I know you from so many different communities. Mm-hmm. It's like, wherever I go, you start popping up also, or like I start seeing you and you're like excited and passionate about similar subjects. So it's always been really interesting to see, what you're busy with. And so it's really good to have you on the podcast.
I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah. So as we explained a little bit before we got started, the podcast, like what we're trying to do here is like find stories that we can share with our community that, that give them something to go with to their managements, to like say like, okay, this is the value of APIs. This is what this can mean for us. And I'm sure that's throughout your career, and also at Nexmo, which now is titled as Vonage, you've seen a lot of these kind of stories. So it's a good place to kick things off and just like if you have any stories about the value of APIs and how you've seen it change businesses, how it made them more resilient, maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, well, I think now I'm at Vonage. APIs are our main product on the side of the business where I work. We make communication APIs. So in this strange time of digital communications are our only interactions, then we obviously have a lot going on. But it's been amazing to see which businesses are using us and how quickly some of those businesses pivoted, turned things around, went from being, supplying large quantities of stuff for retail to suddenly being like local home delivery with delivery notifications on our messaging platforms. I mean, for us, we have APIs for 2FA and SMS messaging, WhatsApp, Viber, different Facebook Messenger stuff. So that's been sort of big, and it's been really interesting to see people come to us. We also do quite a lot of voice, and Vonage, which is traditionally a large American kind of telecoms company, they're actually really global. Both us being us, Nexmo in London, so we were the APIs platform, and then also a company called TalkBox in San Francisco, who are video specialists. So particularly on the video side, as health has always been a story that we've used. I see it in all of the business presentations on work, but suddenly this is real. We have to do health consultation over video. I think my whole team knows a bit more about the video API now, as we've been really hands-on trying to support those customers, and they've done an amazing job to build those things at this time. So yeah, from delivery notifications to the the health consultations, and just families staying in touch. I've seen a bunch of things. So for us, it's not that the APIs, I mean, they are our business. They're not something that improves our business. They're our bread and butter. But to see our platforms enabling other people's businesses to adapt and survive, that's been really affirming for me.
Very interesting. Yeah.
The transformation from in-office doctor visits to telehealth had been talked about here in the US for so long. And it's like, I didn't think that it was anywhere close to being ready for the mass adoption that I see now. It's like there was a switch and it got flipped. And as you said, people responded and started adding those services really quickly. And it's just been really awesome to see that happening and to, see the impact that it's having in helping reduce the spread of the virus and helping people carry on with their daily lives. So thank you for supporting that work. That's really great.
No, it's been good.
Yeah. So you touched a little bit on this switch, because I knew the company that you joined as Nexmo. Mm-hmm. And but recently there's been a shift from Nexmo as a standalone brand to you now really being part of Vonage or and branded as Vonage. Is this something you want to talk a little bit more about? Maybe what is the reason behind it, if you can share that? But then most importantly, how is it changing Vonage? Because I think I see Nexmo is like a platform company. It's a platform to facilitate the usage of telecom APIs. But I think that this must also have a bigger impact on the group, on the Vonage group, in you already know really well how to do APIs, and now that knowledge might trickle more into the day-to-day business, and that's probably transforming the business. I would love to hear stories about that.
Yeah, it's been super interesting. So I've worked a few places that have either been acquired or been rebranded, and we're sort of doing both. So I've been with Nexmo for 2 years, and although I knew them as Nexmo when I joined, I've only ever had a Vonage email address. So the acquisition had already happened, and I think they took the time to work out how those two things fit together. And it's funny because I would say that Nexmo, cool London startup, we're a bit bigger than a startup now, but we think we're a startup, right? Mm-hmm. We have an addressing shortage. In those days when we used to go to offices, remember those? They had kitchens and things. It was a real novelty. And Vonage, which is a big traditional telecoms company, and it has some very enterprise kind of groupware almost offerings. It has a business cloud, and tying those two things together seems like it would be a bit of a culture clash. But for me, I think it's worked quite well. Vonage are so global, and they have such good kind of solid telecoms backends that making modern APIs available to talk to those has worked out quite well. For what used to be Nexmo, the rebrand is super painful because we are well known in very many developer communities. They don't have account managers, right? They know us, they see us every year, they integrate us if they need to send text or telephone notifications or add a 2FA to their login, right? But they don't talk to us all the time. They might be small businesses just using us for booking notifications, appointment reminders, or whatever. So it's been a little bit difficult from that point of view, I think. And we have such a big open source presence. All our libraries are still called Nexmo, and it's a unique 5-letter string. And what are we going to do? When we're part of a bigger company, we need to be more specific about which part of Vonage this is. So I think it's still in progress, but I do also see our approach, only Nexmo already really had developer relations. Talkbox was a really small company, so didn't have much of a department on that side. And I'm starting to see that the stuff that we do around developer content, developer experience, the way that we do APIs, the way that we do internal education as well as external education is definitely, the tendrils are spreading through the business. And I am talking to people in many more departments now than I feel like I did originally. So it's like, ask me this again in a year, because it is really interesting.
Yeah. So do you see, like, because Nexmo really is an API first company, or it was like, at least that part of the business is API first. Do you see that already influencing the rest of the business, or it's still too early?
Yes, I do. So I mentioned the Vonage Business Cloud, which has conference calling and meeting management, some messaging platform and stuff. So they have those products, I think, already had APIs, but they now have API descriptions. So they have the same OpenAPI specs and generated API reference documentation as we had already for all the Nexmo, what used to be Nexmo APIs. So you can just grab that spec and do whatever you want with it. And what's really interesting about that is I'm seeing so much more support for OpenAPI. It's like you can just upload your spec as an integration to all kinds of tools now. So I find that area really interesting too.
Yeah, it's well, I think it shows you've been winning a lot of our awards, so a lot of the Dev Portal awards. So you must be doing a lot of things right with developer experience. So yeah, that's good.
I'm very interested in your role as developer advocate and how you see that and how you use that role to impact things like the developer portal and the API program, and how much of that is inwardly focused on getting resources aligned the way that you see they need to be, and how much of that is externally focused.
Yeah, it's got a few different prongs. I think developer experience, no matter how good it is, if it's not well described or really approachable for those developers to onboard, you might as well not have bothered. Like, the best API design in the world is worthless without good docs and good tutorials. So I do a lot on the OpenAPI spec side, and we generate reference documentation. The secret sauce is that I work with tech writers. So they come, and it's such a tricky art to get a good API spec, because you're going to write maybe 2 sentences about 15 different fields. And you've also got example values that you can use to tell a story, and they'll be displayed together in the example documentation. And the way that they do that, I feel, has gone beyond just, this is a string and it accepts up to 20 characters, right? And they use the examples, they use the descriptions to really enable developers. So that's been a big part of it. We have different people within my developer advocacy team that are responsible for individual products. So I do a lot that's just for this product. So I'll advocate to update or add tutorials. I'll advocate for new code snippets that we need. And that's all internal. And either I do it myself or I try and round up an expert to help me. And that can go either way. So there is quite a lot of internal stuff, and I'm working on some education around OpenAPI internally, because it is ridiculous that I travel the world and talk about it, or travel the internet and talk about it, but actually not all my colleagues know. So we're trying to fix that at the moment. There's also this third part that's neither the customers nor the colleagues, and it's like the industry, if you like. So there's a new version of OpenAPI coming out, and it has support for webhooks. So you can describe the incoming HTTP request as well as the outgoing one. And I did quite a lot of work on that spec to propose it and to see it through and make sure that it made sense in use cases other than ours, and kind of work on that. And then to work with the people who make the tools. It's an open standard, so the tools are all open source. So you can kind of be available, and it's easy to converse about improving that. And that's, I think, another thing that we don't, we think of developer advocates as being on a booth at a conference. And in fact, I almost never am, even in normal times.
It's interesting, like you're touching on some of the journey of Lorna Jane from like being the speaker and then like the different aspects of the open source community. Like I was hinting at it earlier, but can you tell me maybe a little bit more about like what's been your journey through these fields? Like how did you get to be the expert on OpenAPI spec? Like at least, the one who actually proposes to do a presentation about it and then actually does this presentation and everyone's like, oh, wow. Actually, I thought I knew this stuff, but this is really good. So how did you get there? Like what's your story?
With OpenAPI specifically, I took a job. I needed a job, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody gave me one. And this company called Nexmo has all their APIs described with OpenAPI spec. And then you start to look at it and you go, oh, well, if we did this, this would be better. And if we did that, that would be better. And, oh, we could describe some more error cases here. And we could be a bit more thorough with this. Or, oh, if we changed this and just restructured it, it would look the same in the documentation, but the generated SDKs would suddenly have much more meaningful method names. And I kind of pulled on the thread, and I'm still pulling. Like I say, it's an open standard. So it has open communication. You can check their meeting agendas and join their meetings. You can open issues. And if you're going to show up and do the work and back it up and kind of talk to them, then that's how you get into it. I don't know. I think my background is in software development, but it's strongly in open source. Mm-hmm. So I do always describe myself as being raised by the open source community, and more than one of those, right? So I have a PHP background, kinda. I'm now so polyglot, I can't really write PHP either. So it's just like a big soup of what language is this? Where do the brackets go? Which I'm hugely enjoying, by the way. I now write more Golang than PHP in my day job. It's really strange. And I maintain a Python project for fun. I don't really know any Python. It's like changing slowly. But because I have this background of, oh, hey, there's something going on there, I'll patch it, then that's what drew me in. I've always been API specialist. I wrote a book about web services for O'Reilly way back in the day. And now it's like, oh, we can teach this to the machines. And the machines can do the work. And suddenly what would be a really verbose and detailed, difficult reference document, the machines can manipulate it, and I can use it as the source of truth for loads of different things. So I think I'm just so interested in APIs and what APIs mean as integrations in letting the machines talk to each other, and the things that we can achieve when we can do that. Then that led me down this spec route, and I've got this far because I'm just interested.
And it's really inspiring because often people don't realize, like this, it's that passion that makes the difference. Just stand up and do the thing and jump in and lead with your passion, and people will start following you. And yeah, it's really inspiring. Like that's what I mentioned. Like I've seen you at DrupalCon, I've seen you at FullStem. It's amazing. Yeah, good.
So I can imagine that your work on the OpenAPI spec, you're working with so many people from so many different industries. And I find that it's anytime I've participated in any kind of consortium trying to develop some specs, it seems so hard to get everyone aligned. And you must have, some political, genes or something to be able to do that. I'm curious to know what's it like contributing in developing, the next version of the OpenAPI spec.
So I am not going to lie, this is glacial. I was freelance for a bunch of years. Now I work in DevRel. We're all just winging it. We're pretty reactive. That's not how standards bodies work, right? Mm-hmm. And I think OpenAPI is probably at the reasonably young and dynamic end of the spectrum, and I was still absolutely ready to quit more than once. But actually, it's a good crowd. And I have contact with a few of those. Like, I know a few of them in person, which is a real luxury. Again, as Christoph says, it's from being out there. I know them either by GitHub username or as an actual human that I've seen in a real like space and time place sometime. And it's been, I know them through a few different channels, and, you know, maybe we're chatting about one thing and they've taken the time to encourage me to stick with it. And I think that's important because it's very easy for those kind of standards-based setups to get very bogged down in their process. You know, it's a Linux Foundation project, and they have a way of doing things, and they've been doing it that way for quite a long time. And not that it doesn't work, but it can be frustrating to work that way. And it's nobody's job, right? There's a bunch of people who volunteered to help either supervise the thing or drive the thing, and they all have real jobs. You know, the OpenAPI is just a bunch of people trying to make the world better, and they don't have a lot of bandwidth. So you have to be patient and be quite persistent. But yeah, I was quite lucky that the crowd kind of also encouraged me.
Yeah, that's good. And how it feels like the landscape is shifting now again. Like we had like GraphQL sweeping through. It feels like it's still there, it's still growing, but it's not the REST replacement that some people were arguing that it would be. You have async APIs that are sweeping through now. Similarly, we get a lot of requests for Kafka queues and for describing Kafka queues and you know, how do you document that in a sane way? So how do you see all of this? What is the role of the OpenAPI spec compared to these different formats? Like, do you have an opinion on this stuff, or because you have a very interesting developer experience viewpoint on that, so I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, so OpenAPI, like API descriptions are not new. We've been looking at the precursors to this, API Blueprint, RAML, Swagger. It's all been around for a while, and I actually did a couple of years as an open source database specialist. Kind of missed the API world for a couple of years, and then I started doing this job. OpenAPI is a really good standard, and it is evolving. It went a little while between releases, but I think they've kind of sorted out their writer's block now. And evolving to better support JSON schema, evolving to support webhooks, because we all use webhooks. You've used GitHub. You've hooked up to the push webhook from GitHub. Like, we need to be able to describe that. It's very industry linked. It's very real. It you know, enables the things we're actually doing, and I think that's amazing. Async API is a sister spec, so it's also under the OpenAPI Initiative, and that's nice because the contributors to Async API are really aware of what's going on in OpenAPI, and where the two things are equivalent, we try and do it the same way. I've done a little bit with Async API, looking at describing the MQTT stuff that I have going on in the house, because it's fine when there's 4 messages, and after that, like if I want to go back and change it in a year, I'm going to have no idea. So being able to describe that kind of pub/sub style feels industry changing. It's behind OpenAPI. You know, OpenAPI is positively mainstream. Like you shouldn't be publishing an API today without OpenAPI. Like, why would you do that? But Async API isn't quite that standard, but it covers a bunch of things. Kafka's a really good example because so many people have that in their stack. So I'm super interested to see where it goes. We started getting requests for that from some customers. So it's interesting. Yeah, it feels that it's shifting. Like there were some requests about GraphQL, but that went away again a little bit more. But this feels more real somehow.
Yeah. I still have a few customers that are talking about GraphQL, and you know, it still feels early to dismiss it to me.
That's not what I meant. How to explain this? I've heard companies that implement GraphQL that said that this is really good, it was really important. It was a game changer for a select audience. But then there were still a whole bunch of other people that were still using REST APIs because it just made more sense for them. So it feels like it's like a high leverage API format, which is for a smaller group of people. Probably, possibly. Like that's definitely for mobile and that kind of things. But there's, yeah. And I think actually this brings us to another topic that I would love to hear your opinion on is one thing that I'm really passionate about is bringing the power of APIs to the masses. Like how are we going to give this new infrastructure that API is, how do we bring that to as wide an audience as possible? Because right now APIs still for the most part are a developer's playground. And I think that, and it will always be to some extent. I think there are certain types of integrations that will always require developers. But I think at the same time that the real value of APIs will only be achievable if we can bring it outside of a developer audience, a strictly developer audience. Like we see some of this already happening in the dev portal world where we see both business and technical audiences starting to look at APIs and that you need to put business documentation in your dev portal. But I think there's more here. Like we had one customer did some really interesting things with what they call business solutions, which is putting an interface in front of an API that makes it something that regular people can start playing with to build business solutions. Like, have you seen something like that in your career or more recently at Nexmo that you think this could be the thing? Like, because we heard Ken Lane tell us about different no-code, low-code initiatives popping up, like the if this and that kind of things. But what's Zapier, your feeling about this? Zapier's, yeah.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about that?
We are definitely seeing that, and I think in the API space, I am seeing more and more people having maybe a web-based studio product or those kinds of things. At Vonage, we have quite a focus on the low code side of things. I'm not sure it's ever really no code, but if you think of what people who would describe themselves as non-technical, and maybe you can hear the air quotes, non-technical, what they achieve with an Excel spreadsheet, right, is quite technical. And I think this stuff is kind of on that level. So rather than having our own studio product, what we have at Vonage is we have modules for Node-RED. So this is traditionally an IoT style tool. It's a graphical interface, and it's ideal for doing things such as when you receive a phone call, say the following. And if they press 3, then play the sound. And you can put all that together in a graphical editor and just filling in some form fields when you edit the settings. So the Node-RED stuff is just so cool. I love it. And I think you can run Node-RED in the cloud. I've seen it packaged as an Electron app as well. So you would just click to install, put in your API key and secret, configure what you want to happen. Now you've got your, let's say, school answering machine, and you can press the button when you need to have it speak the message about the snow day and just put that on. So you don't have to man the office or whatever it is that you need. You can do a very simple greeting and a little interactive voice response type thing.
I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, the other thing that we have is, the Zapier integrations. So we have integrations for the voice and SMS APIs that we have at Vonage. So you can just plug that in Zapier. And one of my colleagues is writing some amazing blog content. But we think this is big. We are, like everybody, Twitch streamers these days. So we have a Vonage Devs channel on Twitch. And alternate weeks, you can find the low code hour. So we're doing like a regular feature showing off this stuff and encouraging people to get involved. It's really approachable, but also it's API on the back end. So I think this feels to me like the beginning of the things you can do. Because if you can put it into Zapier programmatically, you can put it behind any sort of friendly interface you want.
Well, what I'm excited about on this topic is that the spreadsheet reference was great, because I've seen people do some really, really horrible but powerful things with spreadsheets. And they even call them the database. And I'm like, it's not a database, it's a spreadsheet. And just because you can write VB and a lot of macros, that's not what you need to be doing. So what's exciting to me is about these tools going mainstream and organizations like yours supporting them. And I'm wondering how we make the jump from people who, air quotes, call themselves non-technical and realize that, yes, this developer portal is for me and they've got solutions for me.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky, because, if you ask me what I do, I would talk about developer experience. And, I write our SDKs, and fundamentally, yes, I'm quite technical. And I feel that we are starting to think about those new audiences. And I think they link with the business audience. So there's like some hobbyist part, people who don't code yet but still want to build a thing. But there's also like a whole business audience, or who just need a tool. Don't need to have a separate person with a separate set of skills to configure something, particularly once it's set up and it can be just maintained. So I feel that this is something that will evolve over the coming 12 months or 24 months. I think the landscape will change.
One thing I've been thinking about it, but I have never expressed it. Should we call it something else than a developer portal?
That's a good question, and I mean, no, Christoph, because you have the search terms and everything.
I know, but I wonder if there's like, the developer portal is dead. Long live the developer portal. Is there something? I guess non-technical audiences can identify that they're developing something, so that's not necessarily strictly a developer term. But I wonder, it still feels that there's some rebranding that's necessary, and it feels that is happening. It's just really fascinating, because if this and that, Zapier, like, these are tools that have been around for quite a while already, and it's interesting how you need to have a change in culture to really catch the wave. And it's fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see if this is the thing. Also, in the corporate world, there's the whole integration platform as a service thing that's happening, and yeah.
So I have a hypothesis that's half baked in my kitchen right now, and I'm going to unveil it, even though I think it's half baked. But the big productivity gains that we saw first with the creation of the knowledge worker with PCs and distributing that computing power down to the organizations, there was all kinds of value added to the entire economy by efficiencies gained by doing that. And, then the internet and brought another wave of innovation. And I've heard economists, ruing the fact that companies aren't yet eking out more performance gains and more efficiency gains. And in the work that I've done with Christoph here at Pronovix, I'm starting more and more to see that APIs is what's going to do that. And this democratization of APIs is kind of analogous to the same sort of mass adoption waves that drove efficiencies for the knowledge worker that then came with the internet. And this is the next layer on top of that. And by the way, this isn't all my thinking. I sit at Christoph's feet and smart people like you and soak up what I can. But, do you think that's real? Is that what's happening, or is that what can happen?
I think there's definitely something there. I think APIs, right? So I'm a developer advocate, And I love doing this job of focusing on developer experience and kind of letting people in, because I'm an enabler, and the APIs are a huge enabler, both to allow people to do things, but also to allow, like, the data exists in the world. Why do we sometimes have to type it in from one place to another? Or the APIs are what allow all those integrations, and we can start to then configure what we want people to do with what should happen when something else happens. And I feel there's like a whole, I think I'm going to say the word synergy in public. Oh dear.
We would hold it against you.
We can edit it out, right?
Yeah, we can cut synergy.
There's a whole synergy around allowing people to use the APIs to power up their work. Like, at Vonage, we're just a platform. But seeing what people do with the platform, we had a talk at our developer day from someone who had built this landline phone-based befriending community connection hub, because that's the technology they have there that their local people understand. We've got people holding a church service by telephone with just enough user interface to allow them to unmute in case anyone wants to say anything or request a prayer. People are building these amazing things. And so for me, the movement has begun. And by allowing more and more access to these APIs, whether by building the low-code integrations or more different ways to access those APIs, or by building the SDKs that make it easy, or the developer documentation that really enables a developer to integrate with something very technical on their side. Those are all part of the same picture. They're different sides of the same stone. And I think it is something that's going to change.
You're pushing up against something that I would say is a corollary to my hypothesis, and that is these efficiency gains that we were talking about tended to happen within the boundaries of a company. And what the promise of digital transformation and the API economy is that the business value that's created doesn't reside exclusively within an organization, but rather through those connections between them. So this is enabling a kind of a community of companies, and it doesn't have to be, competitive and purely transactional, but between a company and its partner or its customers through these APIs, that they can actually build value together that neither one of them could have achieved on its own. But a classic case of the sum being greater than the parts.
And it's interesting how this fabric of value that we're weaving, how it's changing things, because it feels like the world has been very, very transactional and kind of isolationist, where you're in your little company, you're doing your thing. Open source kind of broke that open, where you started thinking in a different way. I personally have I've got a bit of mixed feelings right now about open source. It's because it's gotten so, like, it was this big dream, and I think it's become, again, also quite transactional in its own right. So and also I think it's partially probably some of our story, because we've done open source projects where we're just really hard to make a business out of things, and then kind of the disillusionments that you still need to make money also, and that's not always that straightforward. But it feels like this is shifting, and maybe there's a new kind of future out there where this power that APIs give us, this information infrastructure, and that this becomes a common good that just enables a whole different way of doing business and creating value for people. That doesn't have to be as much siloed as it used to be. I think one of my biggest gripes today with the world we live in is like you buy a washing machine and it works fine for a couple of years. Then it breaks down. You call up a technician to come and look at it, and they have to like replace the whole engine block because the carbon brushes that are in there are not sold separately because this company that you bought it from just sells the whole engine block in one piece. And it's this throwaway culture where we're really good at selling products that are purely standardized, but businesses are not taking responsibility for the integration. And it feels to me that this needs to shift for a lot of different reasons. Like we see, it's interesting because we are in that space with our product, right? Because we do custom build dev portals on top of a product. But it's always interesting to like have that like, yeah, but if we have a SaaS product, then it would be so much easier, or then it's like this unit of things. How do you see this? Like with your open source background, what do you feel is this shifting? Is this going in a different place now, or is this what's the future of open source? Ooh, big question. You don't necessarily have to answer that.
I'm here for the big questions. It's definitely an interesting time, and right now none of us can travel. And I feel in this role, when I joined this job, I said I didn't want to travel a lot. So my contract actually specifies that I do not travel. Christoph knows this is not true, as he's seen me in several different places. But I think that idea of having someone who interacts with the community that itself is self-service and is on the internet. The majority of the community that I support never meets a salesperson, and they can build this API into all of them can integrate with the API with our platforms in the same way. Now, I feel like there's a parallel there between that and the open source stuff, right? Everyone's got access to the same open source resources, and it's very much what you do with it. Do you just download it? Do you find out more about it? Do you check the pull request queue? Do you contribute back? Do you replicate an issue? And you in a lot of ways, but maybe not in a measurable business way, you get back what you put in. And now I feel that open source is a real leveler. There are some strange and commercial things going on around the edges that I'm not really familiar with, but fundamentally, the important things we rely on are alive and well, and you can run open source software, everything, as you wish. And now today, we're all on video call because none of us can travel. That means all of our events are online. These conversations that we would have if we were all in the same place are digital, and they scale up that way. Yeah. One thing that attracts me to being a developer advocate without travel is it's not just the hallway track, or usually the ramen track, right? After we finish an event and we go for food and we solve the problems of the world. Everybody gets to see that because the events are digital. They're equally accessible. Time zones aside, they're equally accessible from anywhere in the world. A lot of things are free now. So it's still about educating yourself what is out there, hanging out in the spaces which are now people's Twitch streams or a particular Discord channel or the GitHub projects or probably IRC. I'm still on IRC, by the way. There are still humans there. So for me, open source is still happening. I don't see it changing. And I think I see some of those patterns, some of those benefits spreading across things that are not just software. As you know, I'm a blogger. I have always been a blogger. Blogging went out of fashion, and I still blog to an well-known open source PHP platform on a server that I run myself. The important thing is that I have those words and I write them down and I share them, and anybody anywhere can get those words and see them. So it's having everything be part of the digital space feels very even and inclusive in a way that perhaps some of those wonderful events together that we've done either in Europe or perhaps in North America are not. And for me, that's what drives my open source history into today's developer advocacy and digital advocacy, because actually our communities are everywhere and they now can be everywhere more so than ever.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that was one of the things we saw also with API the Docs, was that we suddenly got people signing up that normally we wouldn't have been able to reach because they couldn't travel, they couldn't afford it. So, yeah. I think I agree with you. I have the same feeling. I think it's... I think my biggest gripe is the competition versus cooperation balance. Like, you need both. You need competition and cooperation. But sometimes it feels that there's a little bit too much competition now. And that it's that people, it's become about like, how fast can I copy you, rather than about adding value on top of what other people are doing so that we are all better off. So like if you rather than looking at like, oh, look, they're successful, let's copy them. Like, why don't you go and find your own little niche that you can expand the value cake of the world and create something new that's going to make people's lives better, rather than just destroying somebody else's business. It's that feeling, I think.
But there's also a whole piece there around, we choose where to participate and where to put our energies. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't govern whether someone else just completely replicates an perfectly good open source existing tool for their own use, and probably that's open source as well, or maybe they didn't like the framework that was used or whatever. Different tech communities have different attitude to this. You get to choose. So you can, like, if you read my Twitter feed, the people that I follow on Twitter, you would discover that Twitter is actually not a trash fire, because that's how I participate on Twitter. The same with GitHub is I am more a contributor, patcher, reviewer than just complaining or consuming. And all of us can choose
how to contribute.
We curate, what we create, what we consume. And then the middle ground is what we curate, the things we choose to share or get involved with or identify with. So I think the world is what we make it, and we can't control what other people are doing, but we can both make our own choices, but then loudly advocate those. And that's typically my attitude.
I love that.
Christoph, we're probably going to have to start a support group for wounded open source contributors and CEOs. Because, I know from whence some of your pain comes, and But I really like that the point that Lorna makes about it being an amazing enabler for people. I still see it that way, and I'm still very excited about that. I have a question, and I was looking for a way to segue here, and it didn't present itself, but I'm interested in, you've spent so much time, Lorna, looking at developer experience and developer relations and APIs, and you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. One of the goals of this podcast is for us to help enable API teams to be successful in facing the challenges that they've got right now. So can you talk about what you see as some of the most common pitfalls that or mistakes that people make in implementing an API program or a developer portal or with their documentation? Take it wherever you want, but let's try to help people out with some specific guidance on things that they might be doing wrong that aren't obvious to them?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. And I think it's the same approach that a lot of the traps are the same as they are elsewhere in software development. Like, we listen to the salesperson or our own ideas rather than actually asking the customer what they need, or writing down some user stories of who all the different people are and what they might need. And I think if you can stick to those, that can help a lot. The other thing that I see is people diving into code too early and docs too late. I've been advocating for a long time, like a number of years, to write the docs first for an API. Now, this is brilliant because it makes you think really hard about what the field should be called and how the error should look. It also enables both your product owners and your business people to be as involved in this process as the engineers are. Now, they're the API level experts. We've talked about how our APIs are mostly aimed at developers. But when you go to code too early, you lock out a bunch of the people who could give value to the process. You might have noticed I'm a huge OpenAPI convert. Now, what's interesting is I didn't choose this, right? I literally needed a job and somebody gave me one. And I landed at a company that has OpenAPI specs, right? And there's absolutely no level of like foresight, knowledge, design, inspiration. I just found, I mean, they're in better state now, right, than when I arrived, but they were there, and that decision was not made by me. But I'm a huge convert because if you write the spec first, you can generate the documentation immediately. All those people can sit around the table and have that conversation. But for me as an engineer, I can spin up the mock server and poke it with curl and kind of think about how that would work and consider what the generated client code might look like and try and think about it from more points of view because I can look at it from more angles. So for me, it's not that I see people doing things wrong, although, you know, if you could try and vaguely keep to the rules of HTTP, that'd be lovely. But says the woman who's like, the product I look after most at Vonage is one that we've had a long time, and it does return a 200 status with an error in its current incarnation. I know what's in V2, but if you integrate with it today, that's not what's there. So do as I say, not as I do. So for me, I feel there's a good understanding of the ingredients to a good API experience, but it falls down when people play that beautiful music, but the notes are in the wrong order.
I see several people advocating for specification first. But then in the reality, when I talk with most of our customers, that's really not how they do things. And it's been a gripe. Like, I've been talking, I don't know if you've seen the talk from Jenny Wanger about the UX of DX. Go and have a look at that. You're going to love it. She talked, I think this was at our Chicago event. She talked about using UX methodologies to do API design. It's brilliant. And I was looking at it as like, this is what the world needs. So and I've been thinking about, like, is this maybe a tool that needs to be built? But then it's just really hard to sell it. It's really hard to get the people that are doing APIs to actually do it that way. And I wonder, maybe if the creation of APIs is no longer part of, maybe if that's no longer the developers that control it, that this is going to change. But it feels that, like, right now, it's just too easy to just start coding. And then, oh yeah, but we're already this far, so we're not going to start all over again. Maybe that's why it's not happening right now. But it feels like an uphill battle.
Well, I feel like we've made bigger leaps of faith in software. At one time, when I became a professional developer more years ago that we're going to talk about, right? I worked for a company that had no source control and no tests.
Right.
And that was absolutely normal. And now you would laugh me out the building if I tried to suggest either one of those, rightly so. And I just feel like there are some companies doing it well and trying to share their ideas and their experiences. we're still figuring out what good practice even looks like. We need more UX. We don't really know how that fits. We're having these conversations, and that's part of the evolution. I think it just takes time, and there will be companies who don't understand that, there is a better way to do this. I, like you, and the way that I like to develop stuff isn't under my control at Vonage. So that's not necessarily always that's what our documented process looks like. That's not necessarily what has it previously happened or might always happen now, just depending there are loads of variables. But I think as we develop best practice and continue to share it through the events, through our blogs, through the podcasts, I am Twitch streaming now to try and reach people for whom that's a good way to work. And I did some async API stuff on my stream last weekend. Sharing that good practice and why it makes things better, right? Because unit tests seemed like a waste of time to me too, until I came back to fix something 6 months later and could do a major refactor without the risk, right? You have to kind of live it to internalize it. And I can tell you, of course, but you have to kind of see it. So my hope is that more companies figure out the benefits of doing the spec first. The code gets easier. We can start to test things more or less out the box. You can start working on your SDKs and your documentation in parallel with the API stuff. And the visibility for business people and product people all the way through the process is radically improved. And it can, by having more voices at the table as we work on a product, we can only improve the outcome because we've got more people represented. So my hope is that word will get out that this is a thing. I'm seeing a lot of customers or a lot of different people in the API space that I talk to who they build an API and then they think, we should have some documentation. And a lot of them are still written in Java for whatever reason. And that's also fine. It's not there's no tech stack hate here. I write multiple languages and I could argue passionately for or against any of them. And so they take that sort of traditional Java doc approach and then they generate this documentation of the code that describes the API endpoints, which sort of works, except one of the major benefits of OpenAPI and the other API description languages, pick your poison on this, right, is it encourages description. It encourages examples. It's intended to be complete and self-explanatory. So unless you want all of that in your code base, then you have put the cart before the horse. That's
a really awesome note, probably to wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm so down with that. As I look at my experience, I tell people that the developers can write whatever is needed, but explaining the business problem and having business people and developers working together and communicating at a very high level, that's the challenge. And until this conversation, I didn't really see this spec first approach as clearly as I do now as one of those fundamental business developer communication opportunities. So thank you so much for that example. That was, if we had to condense everything just to that, I think our time was well spent. This was really great.
Thank you, Lorna. Is there any last pitch you want to do to our audience? Something that you say, go on to the barricades. This, you should be caring about this, or you should know about this, or something you would like to ask from the audience.
I think it is, if you are not using an API description for your APIs, then just educate yourself a little bit about that. The OpenAPI Initiative is running the API Specifications Conference in September. There's lots of resources around. It's the most open and chatty community that I've run into in a while. And although it's nice because it's diverse, lots of different tech stacks, lots of different industries, but just take the time, find something out about how that API description would look, and just spend some time thinking about how that would fit in your workflow. Like, we have automated change logs, the documentation regenerates itself, the SDKs are based off it. There's a bunch of things you can do. You're not going to do all of them today, but find out a bit more about it.
Very good. Thank you very much, Lorna. Thank you for coming on and for having this chat with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. It's been great to meet you, and this was great.
Thank you for listening to the API Resilience podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts for our latest episodes. You can contact us at podcast@pronovix.com, and until next time, be well.